We are up. This is the Our Town with Troy By, and tonight is a different and special night. And you're going to notice it for any of you who have watched any of our previous episodes. I sure hope you have. And if you haven't, and this is your first time, welcome. And I hope you'll like, subscribe, rate the show, all that kind of stuff. But this is the first time I have a co-host helping me out. Kerry Straub, who is should be somewhat familiar, retired.
Exactly.
Retired special agent. Because he reminded me, as I will talk to my guest here, Dr. Fuller, he reminded me that former means you're not getting paid.
Correct.
You're not collecting your pension.
That's absolutely right.
He has helped me. It's one thing to just always remember how to type out or reference the title of someone and retired or former or whatever, right? I want to get it right. And so he has instilled that in my mind. Retired. Okay. Drawing a pension.
Right.
That's good.
Check of the month club.
So I say that because so Kerry is on camera 3, and Dr. Fuller, TC Fuller, who I'll introduce here in a second, is on camera 2, and I'm camera 1, and we do not have the studio camera tonight. Maybe I'll spend another $680 and I'll get another camera.
And
but I could do it.
You get paid for all this anyway, so.
Do I?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Maybe. In Trade Bank. I'll tell you about Trade Bank later. So we were just talking. I don't know if it'll make it into the edit, but that Jag 28, which is just over Kerry Straub's head, is in memory of Mark Forrester, who was killed in action and is the brother of Thad Forrester. Thad was episode 5 for me. We're buddies. We go back a long ways. And then also he came back in episode 44.
Right.
But and I wanted to, and we were just talking about 9/11, or not 9/11, 9/11 being invented, if you will, in Haleyville, Alabama, where they're from. And so the connection, the reason I'm bringing that up is independently of one another, Dr. Fuller here, who, again, I'll introduce here shortly, was interviewed by Thad here in our studio Monday night. He's in town. His wife is a bureau employee, an attorney. So she's in town doing a training, and they had that booked. Now I knew that Thad was coming. The calendar invite said Fuller Forrester. Got it. So I'm here. I was sitting where Kerry's sitting now, off camera. I didn't have it set up the way I did, and it was great. Now, but then last Thursday night, so before this happens, I get a text from John Salanto. So shout out to him.
Go, John.
Former retired FBI in the industry now, and his wife, sweet wife Levita,
exactly.
as well. I see them at a lot of events. So he texts me. I'm at the Trash Pandas game with my kids, and he says, "Hey, I've got this friend, TC Fuller. He's in town. He's written these books. He's amazing. He's got this incredible career, this incredible story. You need to talk to him." I'm like, okay, that sounds great to me. He does a text introduction, puts us in touch with one another, and I schedule you for Wednesday. And then I guess somewhere on social media, somehow, I know what I did. Thad, I guess, was promoting the fact that he was going to interview you, and I comment. I don't know. Somehow I comment, and then he put 2 and 2 together.
Well, I talked to him.
Did you?
Monday? No, I didn't. Monday is when we did the interview. So a few days beforehand, probably Friday, I reached out to him and said, okay, do we have any prep work you need me to do, anything you want me to read up on, be particularly knowledgeable of so we can discuss, any prep questions or any background or anything. Yeah. And he says, no, we're gonna go forth and do things. He says, we're gonna go to my buddy's house and do this interview. And this was after you and I had arranged things. I said, buddy's house. Okay, I'm doing 2 podcasts in Huntsville, Alabama. Now, mind you, the last time I was in Huntsville was 1995.
Right.
Not exactly a social mecca.
We didn't even have
we didn't even have the Trash Pandas.
Right.
We didn't even have probably a McDonald's.
Right.
So in certain parts of Madison.
There was one.
There was one in Madison. Okay.
But in my head, I'm thinking, okay, Huntsville not that big. I mean, how many podcasters can they be, and how many podcast studios can there be? So I said, what's your buddy's name? And he says, his name's Troy By. And I'm like, you're not going to believe where I'm going to be Wednesday night. And we had a big laugh over that. So
yeah. So shout out to Patriot to the Core podcast. That's his podcast, and Jag 28 again. It's his brother Mark's call sign, right? Yep. What he went by. So I normally don't do this, but I think I should do it for you, Dr. Fuller. I'm going to read your biography. Okay. So this is what you wrote. And again, and actually I can pull this up on the screen. Let me see here. We're going to go to that camera, and So this is just to get you prepped on a little more visual than Thad's, but our viewers at home can read along. So growing up in California, T.C. Fuller graduated from California State University at Fresno. He then served in the U.S. Army as both an infantryman and an explosive ordnance disposal technician before leaving to accept an appointment as a special agent in the FBI. He then spent 20 years working on all manner of federal investigations, as well as serving as a firearms instructor at the FBI Academy and a congressional liaison on Capitol Hill. Along the way, he earned a Master's of Education and an educational doctorate in educational leadership and policy studies. He is retired near Charlotte, North Carolina, slowly going to pot. I had to wait a minute.
Wait. What did that say?
Slowly growing pot.
That turned dark all of a sudden.
Slowly going to pot and driving his wife nuts while trying to keep his kids from doing overly destructive things. Now, there's something else I want to do as part of your intro, and that is read. Let me just go back to this. I do a lot of button pushing. I want to read the closing portion of the email that you sent me.
Okay.
So just like Kerry, he was a guest on the show. I sent the same questions to all of my guests. At some point, I got into kind of a routine that way, and I really liked the way it gave me the way you just kind of ended that email and that those answers to questions. It really allowed me to get a sense of how good of a writer you are, if that's good of, or how well you write. And you're the author of books, which we're going to talk about. But I really feel like I want to read what you wrote there. And so again, the reason I want to do this is also kind of, you're not just a retired FBI agent, and you're not just someone who spent some time in the Army. You've done a lot of things, and that's what's cool when you talk to people who have had like a distinguished career. You've written books, you've done all these things. So I'm going to read this. So right now at the outset of the show, the viewer, the listener gets an appreciation for kind of who you are and what you've accomplished in your words. Okay. I do not want to die with any more regrets than I have to. I am satisfied that I have kept those to a minimum. I have run the bulls in Pamplona, climbed one of the great pyramids in Giza, and fought in 2 wars. I have seen Reagan at his height, Lenin in his tomb, and Clinton take the oath of office. I have worked for 4 of the 8 directors of the FBI, chatted with 2 Medal of Honor winners from World War II, and interrogated dozens of Islamic terrorists. I have strode the temples of Sarnak and Abu Simbel. I have climbed Masada, the Munster, and Mount Sinai. I have seen the view from the top of the World Trade Center and the mountains of the Hindu Kush. I have walked the stations of the Cross in Jerusalem and the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, watched the Kuwaiti desert burn, and shoveled snow in Vermont in July. I have been to 49 states, 32 countries, 4 continents, and the Tunbridge World's Fair. I have gone walking in Memphis, purchased items at Folsom Prison gift shop, had a burger at the Sunset Grill, and stood on a corner in Winslow, Arizona. I really like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm glad.
And so also I want to kind of formally welcome Kerry onto the program. How you doing, my friend, as a co-host tonight?
I'm doing great. I'm enjoying this, and I really enjoyed being interviewed by you the previous time, and I didn't realize how. I don't want to say your podcast in the Huntsville area has grown exponentially.
I appreciate it.
So, and a number of my friends have said, "Oh, you were on that? I got to go listen to that." So, and there was one friend that even said, "Man, I listened to it. I had to listen to it twice."
Really?
Yeah. So, I appreciate it.
So I'll call you TC.
Please.
I'm going to call you TC. And the cool thing about
how about Dr. TC?
God.
Well, here's the cool thing about TC and I. Well, so I go by Troy, which is my middle name,
Right.
And T and TC stands for Troy. So we have, a little bit of a connection there.
And as I was telling you the other night, my 8-year-old son, he recognized that there aren't a lot of Troys running around. Well,
Right.
He's a junior. So when I told him I was being interviewed by a guy named Troy, he goes, "Dad, that's great.
There's another Troy.
Another one."
There's another Troy out there.
So
and Dr. Fuller has been on many different. You've been the guest of Rich Brown's podcast, for example, many times, and others. I did a lot of listening to some of those to get a feel for who you were, I definitely feel like you're on there because you're an expert, right? And they want you on there.
I'm at least the closest to an expert that Rich can get. So, and I'll tell you what, Rich knows everybody.
Does he?
It's stunning how many people that guy knows. He just put out his memoirs, and I don't think he put nearly as many people in that book that he should have. But he knows a lot of folks. So the fact that he keeps asking me on is quite flattering.
Now, can you? So I guess I read that piece. I read your biography, but that certainly doesn't do it complete justice. If you could, what are those? I was drawn to you in particular, not just because John Talanta. So once John Talanta says, "Hey, you got to talk to this guy," a few things that I listened to, I was of particular interest was your assessment, your analysis of like the Nashville school shooting.
Oh,
and you're with, I think it was with either Rich or on a different podcast where you guys kind of broke down that 6 minutes and 2 seconds.
Yeah,
right, frame by frame, if you will.
Pretty close to it. Yeah, I did one with Andrew Bronca's show, The Law of Self-Defense, and then I followed up with an analysis on Rich's show.
And then certainly Kerry and I this week were involved in a lot of the things related to industry that we're all kind of chasing the FBI contracts and that work that's going to be down here at the Arsenal. So there's that aspect, right? As far as what does Dr. Fuller, TC Fuller, have to do with the Our Town podcast? Well, remember, Our Town is both literal and figurative, right? You can paint that town around any boundary that's important to you and of where you have turf, right? Whether that's the whole U.S. or the state you live in or the town, literally the town you live in, the city. So I think the connection to the FBI, but then the school thing was just fascinating.
Thank you.
Right, as far as you guys saying, man, in this situation, the school personnel administration were well trained, that type of thing, right?
They were well trained and they executed.
And the cops some of them were military trained, so you're kind of being able to analyze for the viewer that's listening to expert analysis on, well, that is somebody who's military trained, where they have their thumb on the safety, off, on, right, just very well executed.
Yeah, he was certainly well trained. I've never seen any of their training records, so I don't know that they were military trained.
Right.
I kind of default to thinking that.
It's a good guess.
They both had excellent training, and they adhered to their training.
And with them, they did not hesitate. I mean, that's the big thing, right? They got a team together and immediately went in because from other shootings, you have some that were like, okay, let's figure out what we're doing versus let's go where the fire. And that's law enforcement, right? Go where go where the sounds are coming from.
Right. Well, and you and I, when we started our career, the thinking on that subject was form a perimeter, talk them down.
Right.
SWAT shows up. If there has to be an entry, SWAT's going to do it. That's an hours-long process. And we started learning in Columbine, and sadly, several incidents since then, that you just don't have the time. You've got to stop the killing.
You get 2 or 3 people and with comms and go.
Yeah, and that's what they did.
Right.
Yeah, that's what they did.
And here's what's amazing. So then I walk into work on Monday, and there's an issue. So shout out to the magazine Business Alabama. Okay. So I get several magazines at work. I work for Mantech. That's my normal job, right? And on page 12, I come across this company down in Coleman. Not Coleman like the camping gear Coleman. It's Cullman, and it's about 40 miles?
45 minutes.
45 minutes away. And after the Uvalde shooting in Texas, the wife of the owner of this company called KT Construction calls him up and was like, we've got to do something to protect these children. So I loosely understood that they had some sort of product. Of course, we live like in Tornado Alley down here, and there's all kinds of things to temporary shelters. And they have some sort of shelter that they were building for that type of thing, right? Weather safety. And she was like, is there anything you can do to protect these kids in our classrooms? He says, it's a really interesting thought. Let me think about it and, go to work on it. And so this is what they've come up with. And it's called, and I think this was back in March when this was kind of first publicized. It's just taking me longer to hit these buttons. But so you see this this classroom here, and you see this is where it's been fully built out, and they can fit like 70 children and an adult in here, and there's a doorway. And what the teacher does, if you can see my cursor down here, she just pulls on this corner. It's kind of like when you're opening a pop-up tent.
And it just pulls out.
And it just pulls out, and they can go in there, and it's a ballistic proof, right? It's bulletproof, and they're protected in there. Nice. So let me just show you. I'm just going to run this little quick video, and you can just see how she demonstrates it. And I might have to do this a couple times because here we go. Here I'm going to start that over, and then I'm going to make an interesting or an important point. But watch her pulling on it and it kind of sliding there. You see how it's expanding, and then boom, 4 corners, and so those are whiteboards. Functionally,
so it can be functional for.
It's a functional for the classroom. It's
right.
the whiteboards, and then if the siren goes off, right? Mm-hmm. We have an active shooter situation. He or she can pull on that. Now, I think this is 8x8, and the issue is this is already kind of heavy enough. Mm-hmm. You saw her, an average woman, right, or man, struggling to open it. So they can't go to like a 10x10 yet until they can re-engineer it or figure out how to use like lighter material, but it's just as effective. But I just thought about, I was like, so I want to highlight Business Alabama for writing this and highlighting KT Construction. I think they have orders for 5,000 classrooms.
Wow.
And he's like, I want to put it in 1 million classrooms this year. He's like, we won't hit 1 million, but we can probably do 100,000. Wow. So sad that we're in a state that's necessary, but really cool that, and we take pride in Alabama, just as you take pride where you're from, right? We're very proud of our industry. And really cool to see that, and I think you're going to hear. I think obviously that they've engineered a wonderful solution, if you will, to prevent somewhat casualties, right, in this type of thing. So I wanted to call your attention to that.
Well, I think that's very impressive, especially with the speed at which they've put it together.
Yeah,
and of course it also speaks to the fact that when Mama speaks,
the
kingdom listens, right?
Yeah.
So good for them. And if they can get them in the classrooms at an affordable rate, that's even better. It doesn't look like it's terribly difficult to install either.
No.
A couple of tracks and slap those walls in.
It's brilliant, right?
Yeah.
Do you? I just am curious. Like after you complete a show like that and you do your assessment, have other people reached out to you? Is that becoming somewhat of a? Now your company is the Horus Group, HORUS, and we'll show that website later. So you are consulting and providing services and training and expertise to clients.
I do, and one of the selling points that I make to all my clients is their privacy. I keep it very, very close to the vest who my clients are. I don't talk about them. I don't use them in my advertising and whatnot.
Yeah.
But yes, I've had other inquiries about that as a result of the podcast that I've done. People asking about church security, school security. It's funny because a lot of law enforcement goes into those industries, and it's a big deal when a cop says, I don't know something about violence, and asks somebody else for help about that. So it doesn't happen nearly as often as it probably should. But the short answer to your question is yes, it has happened.
Okay. Did you have any, Kerry, and we didn't talk about active shooters and stuff during your career, but did you have any experience with that?
So it's funny. So anybody from Redstone will recall it was back in 2017 or 2018. Redstone was going to do an active shooter training for the Von Braun Center, and all of a sudden somebody calls in and says there's people with guns, and it was the Von Braun Center, and the call went out that there was an active shooter on Redstone in the Von Braun Center. So I get out there, and an active shooter, I'll give you 2 in a minute. But that one, the active shooter, there was none. But everybody showed up. I mean, active shooter, everybody comes out. It doesn't matter. We had folks coming from all of North Alabama. We had our folks coming from Birmingham on up too. And again, the way, the law enforcement did a great job. We would get 3 or 4 folks, make sure we had 2 different sets of comms, and then we started clearing the building. And Redstone and the folks out there also did very well. There was a number of folks when they didn't hear that it was a training exercise. I mean, they barred the door. And then, the funny side about it was they barred the door, and then we're going through clearing the area, and we knock on the door. Anybody in there? Who are you? We're the FBI. How do I know you're the FBI? And so we're going back and forth, and finally, you know, but we're still, I mean, we don't know whether there's a active shooter or not. So, you know, we're still kind of, we have to be tactical. So, you know, all right, I'm reaching in to get my creds to show, and the door kind of opens up, and the creds, oh, okay. So the other thing we learned, which after that I would go talk to companies about, is that they need to engage with their law enforcement, because we didn't know the building. There is, you know, you go to a building on Redstone, or if you go to a building in your community, if you're new to the building, you don't know what little cubby holes are out there or whatever else. You know, one of the agents, one of my buddies, he's like, okay, what do we do? And he ripped the fire exit sign off the wall and said, okay, let's follow it to find it. The other one, I showed up after the event, but, you know, we didn't know at the time was, and you wouldn't remember, it was UAH had an active shooter, Amy Bishop. And Amy Bishop went into, she was not going to get tenure. And she went in on a faculty meeting, and I think it was 3 or 4 people she shot and killed. And
over tenure.
Over tenure. And then she just walked out and threw the gun in a garbage can. And then come to find out, when we did some research on her, she apparently shot her brother when she was younger.
Jeez.
And, you know, that we didn't know until after the fact. So.
So you've written 2 books.
I have.
One of which was under a nom de plume.
It was. I'm finishing up right now with the redo on that, so I'm going to kick that back out under a new title and under my own name as soon as I get the cover art straightened out. But yes, I wrote one. It was originally titled Reasonable, Justified, and Necessary. I wrote it while I was still in the Bureau and had to get all kinds of permissions to publish it and make a secondary job and get paid for it. And I wrote that under the nom de plume of Dan Bernoulli. And for many years, I wrote articles for gun magazines under the name of Dan Bernoulli, and managed to pay for my master's doing that. Writing gun articles back when gun magazines were still a big thing. And then I wrote that book on improving the way we train law enforcement officers to administer deadly force. It's a very dense book. It's not a very super long book, but it's, my attitude was, why use a 2-syllable word when I could put a 5-syllable word in there? And that was effective. That's exactly what I ended up writing. Been married to my wife almost 10 years now. She still hasn't read it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's just
Did she know you wrote the book?
Oh yeah, she knows.
Okay.
She knows, and she's an attorney, so I mean, she spent more than her fair share digging through law books, and she's like, yeah, I'm not reading this thing. So I've gone through, and hopefully I've made it a little bit more approachable for this next release.
You know, this is I'm going to ask you this question because you're well educated. When do you use like alias for pseudonym versus nom de plume?
Usually I use nom de plume when I'm trying to sound smarter than I perhaps am. You know,
sounds good,
right? It does. It sounds very, very hoity and toity. So, I think they're all interchangeable. Alias tends to have more of a nefarious connotation to me. You know.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can use a pen name. That's another simple way to put it. So that's probably the way I should.
Yeah.
Go with in the future.
I remember the time I spent in the intel, I thought pseudonym was supposed to only be in the written form. If you were in written communication and writing a name, you would use pseudonym, but alias would be just kind of like your identity out and about, right? And certain documentation backing you up.
You clearly put more thought into it than I ever did. That's for sure.
Someone probably corrected me many times, and I felt like, I finally learned this. So just as a primer, so the no safe alternative, your book description, and I'm not going to read it all, but just a little bit. In a time when public trust in law enforcement is eroding, the need for a paradigm shift in police training has become obvious. No Safe Alternative delves deep into the complex world of administering deadly force, presenting a groundbreaking approach to teaching law enforcement officers how to wield this power lawfully and effectively. That's just the first paragraph. Now, the next one, though, is more of your memoirs, Painting Over Rust.
Yes, the second book is Painting Over Rust.
Right.
Exactly.
And let me just show your...
Before we move, I think we should make it clear that No Safe Alternative is the retitle of Reasonable, Justified, and Necessary. So.
Thank you. I was going to mention. There's the cover of Reasonable, Justified. And now, Dan Bernoulli, you know who he was?
Yes, I do.
He was like 1700s mathematician, statistician, or something like that, right?
Yeah,
physicist.
Came up with the Bernoulli, what is now called the Bernoulli Principle.
Bernoulli Principle.
By which airplanes fly. And my thought was when I came up with this pen name was most people that read gun magazines probably aren't super familiar with 18th and 17th century physicists. So, and it sounds like a real name, right? Dan, Bernoulli. So that's what I went with. And every now and then I'd get somebody go, "Hey, I know who that guy is." Good for you.
Well, there's a lot of that, right? How many Kerry Straubs are there, you think, in the world?
I think there's a couple.
Yeah. There's a few Troy Buys. You would
really?
Yeah. I've mentioned it before, but our name was changed when we came from Norway and hit Ellis Island, and they just changed our name. It was Houston before that, before it was Buy.
I wonder how they got from one to the other.
So my mom came through Ellis Island, and a lot of people in my hometown from New Jersey came through Ellis Island, and it was a lot of, they didn't understand, so, it was going to be Carino or Carini, and they decided, it's just Carino. And or the person's like, "Oh, you're now a Smith," or or you're now, and that's how you're now labeled.
You just wanted to get in the United States. You didn't care
what
people called you.
All right, so there's that one, and then this is your new book.
It is
Painting Over Rust, and stories from a 20-year odyssey. And I love to, tell me a little bit first about this title, or I mean, not the title, the illustration.
Oh, the illustration. Okay.
Yeah. What was your thought process in that?
Well, I wanted to link it back to the title,
sure,
obviously. And it's a funny thing. A friend of mine that I shot with 20 years ago is up in New Hampshire. And I was talking to him one time, and I just happened to say, "Hey, you wouldn't happen to know an illustrator or anybody that does cover art, does he?" He said, "Well, my wife does it." I said, "What do you mean? I've known her for 25 years." I said, "Your wife does it?" He said, "Yeah, you didn't know that." So her Penny Maurer is her name, and she took my kind of ham-handed, stumbling idea of what I wanted to do, and she did this, and she said, "Hey, look, we need to get a picture of the front." Well, I said I would like a picture of the front of the Hoover building on there. And she says, "All right, well, which picture do you want to use?" I said, "Well, all the pictures I could find online were licensed. And as we've noted, I'm a retired FBI agent, so ergo, I am cheap. And I don't want to pay for a picture. Right? So I was like, well, heck with that. I'm not paying somebody for a picture. Well, my daughter lives in D.C., my eldest daughter. And she's right up the road, right up on Capitol Hill. And I'm like, "Hey, kid," I call her up, "run down to the FBI building. Take 10 or 20 pictures of the building for me."
I brought it back up.
Okay. And she said, "All right, Dad, no problem." So she trots down there, pulls out her phone, takes a bunch. She calls me. She's like, "Hey, I'm not going to get grabbed by the FBI police about this, right?" It's like, "Nah, people take pictures of the building all the time." I said, "You trying to kick the front door? Yeah, there might be a problem. You throw a rock? Yeah, it might be a problem. But take pictures? Nah, tourists take pictures of that thing constantly. The Chinese have a bazillion pictures of it in their intelligence files. You're good." So she takes a bunch of pictures, sends them to me, and I pull that one out. I sent it to Penny, and this is what she came up with. And we went back and forth a little bit, but she was absolutely a dream to work with. If you need cover art on your book, I highly recommend her.
Wow.
When's your book coming, Troy?
I need to write it first.
Oh, okay.
I actually did start on a book a while ago, like before the podcast stuff, but it's like anything. I mean, is it doable? Yeah, it's doable, but it has to be a priority, right?
Otherwise, you've only got so much time, and you got to figure out where to put that time.
So the thing, Dr. Fuller, about your story, I think we need to go back to the beginning.
Okay.
Because I don't even know where to start. Like, as far as sometimes, we have, not sometimes, but oftentimes I have guests on here, and depending on who they are, there's kind of this natural, like, okay, we're going to start here, we'll start there. If we could, though, in the research I was doing on you, you grew up in California, but then there's usually this quick fast forward and we get right into your military career or something like that. But I'd like to spend some time on your upbringing because I think that's extremely important to the story. I've had several guests where people are so inspired by where they came from, whatever that situation was in their family, and kind of how they got to where they are now, right? And in fact, I just booked a guest for July that's like an incredible, remarkable story of living in her car from the time she was 16, for 3 years, and now, well, I don't want to spoil it.
No.
So California.
Yeah.
And that's where you were born?
It is.
Okay.
I was born in the Balboa Naval Hospital down in San Diego.
Okay.
And my mother left me there and walked out and left me behind.
Really?
She did.
Okay.
Her and her husband were 18, 19. And, this is in the 60s, right? When a woman got in trouble, as she did, they quick like bunny rabbits got married. He enlisted the Navy and off to San Diego they went. She went down there, had the baby, gave me up for adoption. Apparently told him at the time that I had been born severely mentally retarded, so she just left me as a ward of the state. He needed to sign the adoption papers. Well, he was already in Adak, Alaska at that point. So he didn't know better, so he said, okay, no problem. Signed it. She left me behind. She took off. So I was there for a while, went into the system, and was adopted fairly quickly. I was a healthy white male baby boy in the late 60s. So I was adopted by another Navy guy and my mother, and their marriage lasted a couple years. Yeah, I'm going to tell you right now, this is a dumpster fire. This whole thing is a complete dumpster fire. Their marriage lasted a couple years. They broke up. He went back up to the Bay Area when he got out of the Navy, the San Francisco Bay Area. She went there as well. Her family was there. And for the next several years, she dated heavily. This is the 70s, right? Peace, love, and granola kind of time frame. She married a guy who was a Vietnam vet, infantry guy, really physical guy, really abusive guy. That marriage didn't last more than a year or so, year and a half, and that broke up. Then when I was 7, she met her last husband, and he was a real good guy named Rich. He was originally from Ohio. And within a month of her meeting him, she was diagnosed with lung cancer. So at the time, Cleveland had a really good lung and oncology center, and he was from the area, so they agreed. They moved back to Cleveland, so I uprooted with them, went back to Ohio with them, and my monthly weekend visits with her first husband, my legal father, became 2-week summer visits. Stayed in Ohio for about 3 years, was back on one of those 2-week summer visits. She was back in the state. At the time, I didn't know it. I thought she was just visiting her mom at the time, so she was there. I didn't get to see her very much. But what actually she'd been told she only had about a month to live, so she wanted to go home to die, and that's exactly what happened. So she passed when I was 10. Went back to live with her first husband that I didn't know very well. I mean, I knew him from weekends and whatnot.
Yeah.
And his live-in girlfriend. Live-in girlfriend hated my mom with a burning passion.
Really?
Yeah. And so I got the wrong end of that. So, here I am, a 10-year-old kid that's been bounced around a lot. Three dads in 10 years.
Yeah.
Now the only constant in my life is gone. So
now, real quick. Now you're in San Diego.
At this point, we're in the Bay Area. The San
You're back.
Francisco Bay
You're
Area.
Bay Area. Okay. So you get adopted perhaps before your first birthday as an infant, and then she marries 3 times.
Yes.
Okay. By the time she passes when you're 10 years old.
Right. She's on her 3rd marriage when I'm 7.
Okay. And now you're in the Bay Area with her first husband. Yeah. Okay. Who adopted you?
You're gonna need a scorecard. Maybe an abacus will be really helpful here. She eventually became my stepmother. She and I are, oil and water, cats and dogs. We just fight all the time. And that goes on for a while. When I get to my freshman year getting ready to start my freshman year of high school, they put me in a dormitory at a Jesuit all-male college preparatory, Bellarmine College Prep in San Jose. And it's funny because I'm in the dorms and I live half an hour by county transit bus away. My roommate was from Hong Kong. So there's, kids from all over the world and me.
Yeah.
But I was sent there mostly as a punishment just to get me out of the house. But that ended up being great. Loved it. At this point, I'm very, very much in the lower class economically.
And you're 14 or 15.
Right. I'm a freshman.
Okay.
I'm a brand new baby freshman.
And real quick, from the time you were 10 to 14, are you learning on your own? Are you reading? Is your father or stepmother in any way an example to you with education or pushing you to
The examples
explore
I had
your talents?
Yeah, that's a good question. The examples I had were tepid. I had a lot of examples of why not to get into drugs. A lot of relatives, distant relatives, their friends were crashing and burning on drugs. So I knew I got to stay away from that.
Yeah.
My dad was a functioning alcoholic. So I remember the very first time, the first thing I can remember of ever meeting a police officer was we got pulled over. My dad had been drinking all afternoon. And the cop asked him, well, how far do you have to go? And my dad was like, I don't know, about a mile and a half. And the guy's like, okay, keep it slow and stay between the lines and send you all this way. It was the early 70s, right?
Yeah,
You
right.
could get away with it back then. And my dad was always going to classes at De Anza Community College out in California. Constantly. Guy must have had 150 credit hours and an associate's degree. I mean, it was crazy. And he liked to, kind of be very pretentious and condescending to people about his education. So I was like, well, you're a smart guy if you go to get an education. But I was figuring out pretty quickly that, the only way I'm getting out of this mess is to get away from these people and try to get smarter. So then I get to Bellarmine, and I've got the yoke off of me. For those 4 years I was at home, and my stepmother and I fought all the time. And the only real out I had was to read. Was just read. And I would get, in fights with her, and I would get grounded 2-3 weeks at a whack, and I couldn't come out of my room except to use the bathroom, eat, or go to school. So I would just spend time reading. I just read. Whatever I could get my paws on, I'd read. And then I got to Bellarmine, and that was the first place I ever went that intelligence was valued.
Yeah.
They really put a lot of stock in that. And by the time I was 16, I did my freshman year in the dorms. My sophomore year, I had to go home because I'm convinced that they said, okay, he's having way too much fun over there. Get him out of there and pull him home. And then the fights got worse. And
because your grades are slipping?
No, my grades weren't slipping. I wouldn't come home. All the other kids would go home on weekends or.
And you didn't want to go home?
No, God, no. I went with other people, went to other houses, stayed in the dorms, whatever I could do. Didn't want to go home. Because I was actually, there was discipline. It wasn't like I was running the streets or anything, but I was treated better there than I was at home. My father was very aloof, very indifferent, half in the bag most of the time.
Yeah.
And my stepmother is very tyrannical. And we fought just constantly. And so did my sophomore year at home. It was miserable. Junior year, we moved over to downtown San Jose, a couple blocks from San Jose State. Really crappy neighborhood. And Christmas Day, 1983, I left home. I was out. I'm gone. And I never went back. I rented a garden tool storage shed to live in for a while.
Really?
Yeah. The kind where you might put your rakes and your gardening supplies.
Metal sides.
Yeah, exactly. I lived in one of those for a long time. You can in California because the weather wasn't extreme.
Yeah.
And then I started teaching karate. I got into karate when I was about 15, and that provided me some income. Worked in a pizza place. The school gave me work scholarships, so I worked in the library and I worked in the cafeteria. So I was coming to, grinding out the work because I had to. I was really good friends with a Hispanic kid named Hector. And we read the Iliad freshman year, and we were in the same English class. And Father McFadden, rest his soul, was our English professor. And I'm sure he got a huge kick out of having Troy and Hector in the same class. They were best buddies.
Right.
But Hector and I are friends to this day. But he was a poor kid also in that school.
So was it how old were you at that Christmas of 83?
16.
Okay, so you were 16 then.
16.
But you were able to. Oh, that's right. And then you paid for your way at a prep school.
I did. I went down and I talked to the school. But before I actually left the house, I had a plan. I'm leaving. So I talked to the school and said, look, as soon as I leave, they're going to cut me off monetarily. They're going to stop paying you.
Yeah.
I need to arrange because I want to stay. Now, it never occurred to me I could just go to a public school.
Yeah.
I could have just left and go to a public school. But I didn't want to. I wanted to stay there.
Yeah.
And, by the time I was in my 9th grade, I was in my 9th school. And I really wanted to finish a school. I'd been in school moving around all the time. When my mom was married, we'd go to where her husband was. And when she was single, we bounced around because we were getting evicted and she didn't have any job skills. So by the time I got to Bellarmine, I was like, I'm finishing this place.
Yeah.
Come hell or high water.
So how did you, when you were there, when they needed documents signed or anything like that?
Sign them myself.
And that's what I kind of figured.
The 70s, right?
Right.
Yeah,
It was the 80s, yeah.
But the nice thing was the staff knew me and they knew the situation. And they knew that I wasn't the greatest kid. I had my issues. I fought constantly with people because I didn't the slightest slight, if you
Yeah.
will, would set me off, and I wasn't in a good place. But I also wasn't, committing burglaries and random assaults, and they knew I was working. They knew the situation I was in. So if I was,
But you were going to school too. I mean,
was showing up.
You were showing up to school, so I mean that makes a big deal too.
And that was an issue my dad had told me when I said, "Look, I'm leaving." He's like, "Well, I'll call the police." I'm like, "Okay, let's talk that out." It's a 16-year-old kid, right?
Right.
I said, "So the police are going to come and get me, and they're going to force me to come back." Okay. I said, "But you can't imprison me in the house. You got to let me go to school, and I'll go to school, and then I won't come back."
Right.
And the cops will come and get me again. And I said, "I'm not going to just any old school here. I'm going to one of the best prep schools in the country."
Right.
And I'm showing up, and I'm getting decent grades, and I'm got decent attendance. At some point, the cops are going to be tired of this.
Right.
They're going to say, "This is crap. We got other things we got to be doing." I said, "Or you can just leave me alone and let me do this." And he was disinterested. He was more interested in telling people he was a father than he was in actually doing the work.
Is he still alive?
No, he is not. He passed.
Okay. Did they know you were living in a shed?
No one knew that. I kept that real close to the vest.
Okay.
When they asked, I said, "Well, I'm renting a room." And after I'd lived in that shed for about, my beginning of my senior year, middle of my senior year, I got into I rented a room from a family. Mm-hmm. And then that lasted it lasted about a year. And then I moved into another room, and then I went off to college.
Okay.
So, I don't want to sound like I was living under a bus, or under a bridge somewhere, but it wasn't great. But, all my friends were like, "Dude, this has got to be great. You don't have any parents. You can do what you want." I'm like, "Yeah, you know what I want to do? I want to eat, so I got to go to work." And they're like, come party with us. I'm like,
No.
that'd be great if somebody was filling my pockets with cash, but I got to go work at the pizza place because the pizza place, I could get food.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that fed me a few nights a week. Teaching karate fed me a little bit. Working in the cafeteria fed me. Right. So there was kind of some strategy.
What was your disposition? Were you somehow still able to be optimistic about your life and just said, "Okay, I've got a kind of a shitty situation here, but it doesn't need to stop me from being the person I can be. I'm capable. I just happen to have, I'm having a rough go."
I would love to say that I had that deep a level of sort of cognition going on about it. If I'm honest, in hindsight, I would have to say I was angry.
Yeah.
I was pretty angry about things. I wasn't happy with it. And I was so focused on tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And my long-term goal was graduate, go to college. So that was sort of where I was focused on.
Yeah.
And, I had friends.
Yeah.
I was a bit of a dork. I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons with buddies, right? But I was like, if you remember The Breakfast Club.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Okay. You remember Ali Sheedy's character? The girl, and she was just kind of left alone and just kind of weird. And people, that was kind of me. Only there was a little bit more prone to violence. And getting into karate actually settled that down.
Right, because it's discipline.
Right. And I've
an outlet.
I had a channeled vent. The flip side was when I did get into a fight, it was bad.
Right.
It was really bad.
Like you were really busting them up.
Yeah, and I eventually got over that, but at the time it wasn't real pleasant, and I wasn't the best person I could have been.
So to tag along with that question is, so you have a different idea of what a mother and father are. Yeah. Is that, because like me, I had the traditional mom and dad, and so that's, that's different, and you, 3 dads, a mom, drinking and everything else is total.
Yeah, it worried me, and it still worries me. It makes me very hyper concerned about. I got to a point where it's very easy for me to just abandon relationships.
Right.
Because
I'll fix.
Many.
Keep talking.
Okay, because so many of the relationships I had depended on in my growing early years had abandoned me, and it included in my mind a lot of my mom's family. Because when she passed, up until the point she passed, her family members were kind of my closest family members. But when she passed, a lot of that connection was severed as well. And over the course of time, I probably made decisions that didn't help that at all. And I certainly, I say that my stepmother was a tyrant. I have to say, look, I was a 15-year-old pain in the ass. Mm-hmm. But I keep coming back to the hindsight of having raised 3 kids now. We're in the process of raising 2, and got one that's grown and gone. I was a kid. The responsibility for what that kid's doing falls largely on the adults. And so I can look back at that and say, yeah, I was just as guilty of fighting my stepmother as she was fighting me, or, you know, not working with the adults around me. But I was a kid in a really screwed up situation.
Well, and that was my point, right?
Yeah.
That your parents, they didn't do you any favors.
All right. Whether that was intentional or
right.
incidental to the
Right.
circumstance, but yeah, you're right. And I also look back now and I can say, you know, I talk to Hector about this all the time because he's now an MD in San Diego. Owns
Nice.
a concierge medical company. His wife is an MD. So, you know, he hit a home run as well. And he and I just laugh sometimes when we talk. We just crack up. So, like, both of us should have ended up in San Quentin or dead or you know, something crazy.
Right.
Because he lived 2 blocks from where I was at in downtown San Jose, and he grew up there. So the fact that either one of us made it out, let alone both of us, is just, well, you know, statistically, it's stunning.
Right.
So anyhow,
Did kids in the rougher neighborhood realize pretty quick not to mess with you? And maybe there was this assumption they could pick on you, and then there's that fateful moment where it's like, actually, I wouldn't mess with that dude.
I kept a very low profile in the neighborhoods, and
Okay.
then, you know, when I was in the storage shed, I was in a suburb. Because, you know, the rough neighborhoods didn't have backyards with storage sheds in them, frankly. So I kept a very low profile. I rode the county transit bus. I learned, you know, role camouflage. I dressed very neutral, very, you know, leave me alone kind of thing. And I went to this prep school with a bunch of rich, you know, kids from the burbs or from expensive, you know, upper class kids. And they learned pretty quickly to just leave me be. I just wasn't worth the effort. I didn't make a big deal about myself. I wasn't trying to throw my weight around or bully people or anything.
Yeah.
But I also would not put up with being monkeyed with. And so it didn't happen very often, I have to be honest. But when it did, and I couldn't get out of it, because I would try very hard to get out of it, because the last thing I wanted to do was get thrown out of that place.
Yeah.
So did you learn, I mean, because in law enforcement, one of the things that they teach, verbal judo.
Yeah.
So you learned it early.
I did.
Or tried to.
Yeah, I learned very quickly that, you know, I've always been a smartass. Always, always, always. And that got me into problems as often as it got me out of problems.
All right.
And by the time I was a senior, I finally figured out, you know, maybe if you just shut the hell up, you know, a lot of your problems will stop. And so I got to that point. I had to learn. I mean, and I don't want to tell you that I won every fight I was ever in, because, you know, sometimes you get 2, 3 guys. You know, you can be a big bad Billy Badass. Somebody else is a bigger. You're the man until you meet the man, right?
Right.
And so, you know, I gave as good as I got. That's probably the best way to put it. But then, you know, I got to the end of Bellarmine, and now I have to apply to college. Well, I didn't have anybody in my family saying, okay, this is what you got to do. Here's you got to kind of triage where you want to go, and you figure out what you want to do.
Same vein, right? All of us, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have, hey, you need to Google here, here, and here, and then go online and fill out that application.
Yeah, right.
It was, okay, let's write the college, get the books in, and then figure out from there, and then fill out the application with pen and paper.
Yeah, we had a counseling center at Bellarmine. It was a college factory. I mean, I want to say 98.5% of my graduating class went to college.
Okay.
And it usually runs in that field.
Right.
It's 90. What you end up with each year is, you know, 300 graduates, give or take. And they'll have, you know, 4 guys that don't go to college.
And they go to the military.
Some of them, yeah. Some of them just like, you know, turn on, drop out, whatever. You know, that's inevitable. But yeah, so it was very much if you go to college place, but a when you go to college place. So you could go down to the counseling center, which is in a basement, which was very close. In that basement is where I played Dungeons and Dragons with my buddies. So I was always down in the counseling center, and you could pull a little rip off cards and say, hey, send me your flyers, right? And I'd fill those out and send them. So I got a whole bunch of them, and I wanted to be a Marine Corps pilot. It's really what I wanted to do. I started reading, like I said, at a very young age. By the time I was in 5th grade, I was reading all about the Marines in the South Pacific and the 8th Air Force flattening Europe. So those were my 2 kind of things. And so eventually I was like, oh, Marines have pilots. Done and done. That's what I want to do. And then when I was 13, I got glasses. So, you know, back then.
And there's
no
no
surgery.
LASIK. There's no LASIKs.
Couldn't even spell LASIK back then. So I said, well, I'll still try to be a Marine officer. And I applied for a whole bunch of expensive schools, engineering schools all over the country, and applied for a Marine Corps scholarship, and I didn't get it. So now I'm like, well, crap, how am I going to pay for school? Well, I didn't even know there was such a thing as a student loan. Had no clue. So I'm like, holy crap, and I go through my little file. What's the cheapest school I applied to? University of California at Santa Cruz. The Fighting Banana Slugs.
Wow.
Hand of God.
Really?
Yeah, that's their mascot to this day. So, all right, that's where I guess I'm going to go to Santa Cruz, which when you're from the South Bay area, Santa Cruz is just right over the hills. So I grew up going to that beach all the time because it was free entertainment.
So was just out of curiosity, I know maybe the FAFSA process wasn't in place back then, but
if it was, I didn't know about it.
Were you able to declare, like, I don't really have any income, I'm not relying, I should fit into some category and get a scholarship or free tuition because I don't make that much money?
Right. Well, what I don't know is the answer to your question.
Yeah. Did look into it.
Don't know. Didn't know it was such a thing. So I secured private funding.
Okay.
From the last people that I had rented a home from, the mom there, I to this day I kind of call her mom. She's foster mom. She agreed to loan me the money, and she kept track of what she loaned me literally on the back of an envelope.
Wow.
And over the years, and I was of course like, oh man, that number's getting big. I got it, And then halfway through the year, I discovered I could borrow money under a student loan program. I was like, oh, what? I can get money and not have to pay it back for years?
And by the way, it was go to the bank. I mean, I remember we went to the bank with my parents and, okay, all right, how much do you make? Okay, all right, this is what you have to do. And it was go to the bank to figure out what student loans you could qualify for or not.
Right.
Well, I went through, there was a student loan center at UC Santa Cruz, and that's the people I talked to. And the lady there took pity on me. She said, look, I'll help you get all the forms, but you need your dad's tax records. I was like, oh, all right. So I had to go back to him and went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And finally, he acquiesced to give me the 2 years of W-2s or his tax records that I needed because I needed to show that I was independent for 4 years to show that I didn't have to worry about claiming his income. I haven't actually thought about this in years. And I get his tax forms. I turn them into this lady because I don't know what I'm looking at. And she goes, oh, well, he's still claiming you as a tax write-off.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
I'm like, he did what? She's like, oh, yeah. You're not going to get any money from the government based on your income for 4 more years. I'm like, he's telling the federal government that? I was like, really? Huh.
Dependent.
I called the IRS. Told him that he was doing this.
Fraudulent.
Yeah, and years later I found out that they audited him for like a 4-year period. I don't know if it was because I called him or because he was just fast and loose with how he did his taxes. But so I got out of, I finished my freshman year with, very few credit hours from UC Santa Cruz. I wasn't doing well there. I was entertained. I was chasing a lot of girls. I was playing a lot of volleyball down on the beach. I was having a great time, but I wasn't really getting anything done academically. So a couple of things happened in my favor. One, they said, look, we're going to invite you to pursue your academic career, perhaps somewhere better suited to your work ethic. I was like, okay.
I'm going to invite you.
Right. So I started my second half of the year there at UC Santa Cruz. I started putting a little bit more effort in. And I also picked up a bunch of classes down at Cabrillo Community College. So I was working. I'd go to school like in the morning at UC Santa Cruz, and then on my little 125cc motorcycle that wasn't registered and certainly wasn't insured, and I didn't bother with a license.
Street legal.
Barely, yeah. I would go down to Cabrillo and take some community college classes there, and then I worked as a security guard for some canneries down in Watsonville during a strike. That wasn't real smart of me. But a friend of mine was at Fresno State, and he had joined the ROTC detachment down there. And he was looking strack. He was in good physical condition. He was coming up to see me in his uniform. He's like, dude, you got to come down here. And I'd always had this interest in the military, right? And I was like, well, as it happens, I'm going to be free next year to pursue my academics elsewhere. Maybe I'll come down. So we enlisted in the National Guard together, went to basic that summer. Started, the ROTC detachment said, hey, we'll sign you up. You want to be an ROTC detachment with us? I said, yeah, but can you send me to jump school? That would make me sign the dotted line. That would contract with you. Absolutely. So I went to jump school that summer. And so the summer between freshman year and sophomore year of college, I really kind of got my act together.
Where did you go to jump school, Benning?
Oh, yeah. jumped off the mighty Ungawa, and I was terrified of heights. I don't know if I was phobic of heights, but I was pretty freaking close.
Well, I mean, when I went through jump school, it was 90 that I went through jump school. I mean, and you look at those towers, and those towers date back
Oh, yeah.
to like pre or right at World War II.
Really?
Yeah, and I mean, they're still functioning. They're
Still using them.
They were still using them, and you're like, wow.
It's still there. But yeah, so I did jump school, and I got to Fresno State's ROTC detachment, and I just, like a duck to water. Now, all of a sudden, I was focused. Now I had some drive. I hit the ROTC hard. Got my commission 2 years later. I was number 1 on the Order of Merit list, graduating out of there, distinguished military grad. My buddy who recruited me was number 2 on the Order of Merit list, so he was like, "What the hell, man?" I was like, "Hey, you know, don't hate the player, hate the game, brother." But that really made the difference for me, was getting into that.
Yeah.
And
Did they put you on scholarship the last 2 years?
they offered it to me,
Right.
and I was going to Fresno State. And dumbass that I am, I said, "Well, Fresno State's only $450 a semester, and if I do the scholarship, I can't be in the National Guard." Well, in the National Guard, I was getting E5 pay once a month for showing up. And I'm like, well, that's more than the tuition each month. Like, that doesn't make financial sense to take that scholarship. What I should have done, in hindsight, is taken the scholarship and gone to a better school.
Right.
But again, no adults in my life to tell me, hey,
Right, yeah.
smack me in the head. So I passed on the scholarship, and it would have made it easier to go on active duty.
Right.
Didn't know that either. So I passed on the scholarship, stayed in the National Guard, got my commission in 88, a couple weeks after I turned 21, right into the infantry. And I didn't graduate until 90. It took me 5 years to get out of college with my undergrad. But for that interim time between 88 and 90, I was a lieutenant in the same, not just the same company, in the same platoon that I had been
Really.
a driver on a 113.
Wow.
So for your information, Troy, it was back in that time, because that's when I got commissioned too. I got commissioned in 89. There was always a question of whether you would get an active duty slot or not, because the Army was full, and they could pick and choose whether, hey, we'll put you in the National Guard or reserves, or you might get active duty. And so it was also a game. I don't want to call it a numbers game, but it's like you kind of looked and said, okay, where do they think they need more people? Do they need them in the infantry, Corps of Engineers, aviation? And you try to, that's what I was doing too, is try to play the game of, okay, this looks good. And, infantry, they'll always take infantry. But, if you want to do something a little bit more or.
Always take infantry.
Yeah, well, it's tough to market that set of skills from the infantry into, Walmart, right, when you leave the Army.
But the second thing is, in the Army, is you're always an infantryman first, no matter what. I mean, that's you may be under the branch of Corps of Engineers or something, but infantry's first.
Yeah.
You're going to carry a gun. If they need you, you're going to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to call the engineers the infantry with shovels. We had
That's exactly it, right?
We had e-tools. Those guys had real shovels.
Yeah.
Lucky bastards. So I was able to get a regular Army commission out of ROTC, which is a very esoteric difference, but it was a big deal to me at the time.
No, that is a big deal, by the way, that type of commission, because that, again, if they had to do the downsizing, he would stay, and he wouldn't have to be worried about, getting kicked out of the Army. So, that's impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, there was 30 of us that assessed in my year group to try and go on active duty. About 10 made it on active duty, and 3 of us, myself and 2 females, got regular Army.
Yeah.
So it was pretty slim selection process.
Yeah.
And even at that, I was picked up by what's called the branch detail program, which I don't know if it still exists, but at the time you'll remember it, where they said, look, we'll let you be a grunt for a few years, but then we're going to force you to go over to the Ordnance Corps. And I had no interest in being the Ordnance Corps. So I was like, all right, I'll take the infantry and we'll see where things land, right? It's like the old joke about the jester who gets caught monkeying around with the king's daughter. They drag him in front of the king. And the king's like, all right, I'm going to kill you. And he's like, wait. Don't kill me. He says, I can make your horse talk. And the king goes, what? You make my horse talk? He said, yeah. He said, Your Highness, give me a year. From 1 year from today, I'll make your horse talk. If not, okay, well, kill me. And the king's intrigued, so he's like, all right, you got a year.
Right.
1 year from today, we're going to bring you back here. And if my horse doesn't speak, cut your head off.
Yeah.
All right. So the guards are dragging him out. The guard goes, what the hell are you doing, you idiot? You can't make a horse talk. He's, hey, look, I got about a year. So maybe I die. Maybe the king dies. Maybe the horse dies. He says, who knows? Maybe the damn horse will talk. Right? So that was my attitude about going in the infantry. I'm like, hey, I bought some time doing what I want to do.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens 3 years down the road when ordnance comes knocking. So I go off I finish college in May of 90. That summer, I goof around a little bit, and then I do the classic lieutenant thing. I go out and buy a Ford Mustang GT.
Wow.
Strawberry red. Beautiful car. And I pack it up with everything I own, including 6 or 7 firearms. This becomes relevant later in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I start in San Francisco, and I spend the next 6 weeks. I take a little advance pay on my TDY, and I drive down California. I go out to Fort Bliss, see a friend of mine. I go down to Mexico with the guns, come back into the States, drive all the way through the States, go up to St. Louis. I go up to see my old house in Ohio where I lived when I was a kid. Go up to see Niagara Falls, drive into Canada.
Holy smokes.
With the guns. Go up to Ottawa. I take a tour of the Canadian Parliament building and Capitol building. Before I ever saw Washington, D.C., I saw
them.
Canada.
Yeah.
With the guns.
With the guns. With the guns. Drive back down into Vermont, over into Maine, come back down the coast. A friend of mine had been drafted by the Jets, the football team.
Okay.
Hung out with him for a few days. Had a great time. Went down to D.C., hung out there for a couple days. Went down to Pope Air Force Base, caught a military hop back to California, hung out with my girlfriend for a few days, got back on a plane, flew back to North Carolina, finished my drive. Took me about 6 weeks.
Wow.
Had a great time, all by myself, just had a blast. And then I did all the usual schools one does when you join the Army and you join the infantry. I was at Benning for about a year, and then was on my way to the Berlin Brigade in Germany. And
which was my first brigade.
Was it really?
Yeah.
That's where I went first. I mean, when I read his bio and said, "Oh, he was going to go to the Berlin Brigade," I'm like, I don't remember, because there were 3 infantry battalions there at the time, and and all us lieutenants hung out.
All knew each other, I'm sure.
Right, we were all hanging out, and I'm like, TC Fuller, I'm banging my head, and no, I don't.
Yeah.
Don't remember him.
No.
Well, that's because when I got to the 20th Replacement Depot at Rhein-Main Air Force Base, or Air Base, instead of going to Berlin, they say, oh, look, you've got orders to Berlin. I've spent the last year with a Berlin Brigade patch on my shoulder, all my training. I have that unit patch. They're like, yeah, no, tore up my orders, sent me to Manheim because Saddam Hussein had invaded.
Right.
So I get to Manheim, packed up, off to the Gulf. Did that, came back, did a couple years in the infantry there in the same platoon, running back and forth to Hohenfels and Grafenwehr. And
So Hohenfels is the combat maneuver training center there in Germany, like NTC is here in the U.S. And so it's not desert. It's pretty much rain, cold,
mud,
snow, mud, you name it.
And that's in July.
Right, exactly.
Did you have any trepidation when you got sent to into war?
Not really. I mean, it's kind of. I mean, it's sort of a general. Okay, this is serious. This is real. But you spend so much time thinking on it, and by the time I got there, my God, I was 4 years in, and then this comes up in my book, and it comes up a lot over the time I spent in the FBI. Before you ever get put in front of a platoon in the Army, and I don't care what your branch is, you've had a ton of training on leadership, a ton. I mean, I had a 4-year degree, I had 2 years of ROTC, I had basic, I had advanced course or the advanced camp in the ROTC. I had jump school, air assault school, Ranger school, Bradley Commander course. What other schools did we go to? Infantry officer basic course. I mean, this is all before I ever saw an active duty platoon.
Right.
So by the time I got there, I was just like, all right, well, I know what I'm doing. Let's get this done. And you're also, unlike the Bureau, you're a second lieutenant or first lieutenant, whatever you are in a platoon leader position, you have all that training experience. And right next to you is typically an E7. In my case, it was an E6 when I got there, who has 10,
minimum
15 years experience. At that time, we hadn't had the Gulf War. It was Gulf War was there. So our NCOs had more experience by the time they're E7. E7 you make pretty quick now because of the last 20 years of combat. So you got a guy standing right next to you who's the platoon sergeant, who's got 15 years on the job, who can tell you, hey, LT, don't do that. That's dumb. Don't do that. Now, lieutenants being lieutenants, they still screw the pooch on a regular basis. But you've got a lot of people around you in a supporting role that you're told the whole time you're training, listen to these guys. Don't be a knucklehead. Listen to what they have to say. The decision's ultimately yours. But listen to that. Nothing like that in the FBI. We'll talk about that later. So no, I wasn't really, I was worried I was going to screw up.
Yeah.
I was worried I was going to be like, a coward. I was worried I was going to, run away or something. But that didn't end up happening. But a couple of my guys got beat up a little bit, but nobody died. And we got back and finished up my time in the infantry about another, almost 2 years. And then the Ordnance Corps came knocking. And I was like, oh boy. And they sent me over to 51st Replacer Maintenance Battalion. And I became a maintenance officer as a first lieutenant. And I got promoted to captain while I was there. And I got to tell you, Troy, I was miserable.
Really?
Miserable. Because I was a hoo-yah hard charging infantry lieutenant, right? Combat arms, man. And now I was in charge of making sure that, we got all the generators up and running. Hey, Lieutenant, there's too many generators on your report that aren't repaired. You got to fix that. And I'm like, I give up.
Compliance.
Yeah, I don't care about that garbage. So I started thinking, look, if I'm going to do this for a living and be miserable, I'll get out and I'll go to work for Walmart and they'll pay me 2 or 3 times what they're paying me. And I don't have to worry about artillery strikes, right? I don't have to worry about snipers. I don't have to worry about that crap.
Right.
And so I said, all right, before I do that, I'm going to try to stay in the Army but find something else. So I applied for Special Forces Assessment and Selection, which is the first thing you have to get through in order to go to Special Forces, being a Green Beret. And I applied to Explosive Ordnance Disposal.
Okay.
And I said, look, first one that raises a hand is where I'm going to go. So if I can get in with either of these groups, I'm out. And if I can't get in with either of these groups, I'm out of the Army completely. Mm-hmm. So EOD turned around faster and said, yeah, we'll send you to school. We'll give you a shot. And I didn't know much about EOD at the time, but I was just like, anything's got to be better than, turning a wrench. Now, right. And I don't say that to denigrate the guys who turn wrenches and do maintenance. It's critical. I understand that. I'm enough of a student of history and a logistician to understand that you don't get things done without the maintenance guys. It's just not me.
Not you. Yeah.
It's not what I wanted to do. So happily, I got a slot to EOD school. So when I got back from Germany, I went to the advanced course, the Combined Logistics Officers Advanced Course, and finished that and rolled right into EOD school. And that's the advanced course brought me down to Huntsville for the very first time. Came down here, hung out at Redstone, hung out at the Officers Club at Redstone. As far as I know, there's still a tile in the roof of the Redstone Officers Club that my class colored and filled out and wrote our names on and everything, which I thought was kind of cool.
I think they've renovated.
I hope so. I would hope so, right? 30 years, good Lord. So did that and finished EOD school. I got my badge pinned on me up in Maryland on the 19th of April, 95 at about 9 in the morning when the bomb went off in Oklahoma City. Same day. So then I had to drive from there down here to Redstone to finish a month of Army-specific EOD school. And I spent that drive listening to things unfold in Oklahoma City, this bombing unfold. Mm-hmm. So finished EOD school with orders in my pocket to go back overseas. Thought I was, I'd done a long tour overseas. I figured, okay, I'm good for a stateside assignment now. And they're like, no, you're going to Egypt, buddy. So I just spent, 9 months away from my wife and daughter. And I got 30 days at home and then had to go spend a year in the Sinai Desert. And that was good duty. I mean, there's some really good stuff going on over there. Blew up a lot of stuff.
Really?
Oh, my God, we blew up so much stuff. Which, if you're a EOD guy and a bomb guy, Right? That's a ton of fun. Engineers get to play with a lot of bang. Matter of fact, I still to this day have the email address C4 is fun. So
That's right. I noticed that.
Yeah, I still use that. But we did a lot of clearing operations. We'd gather up a lot of munitions that were left over from World War II, the innumerable Arab-Israeli conflicts, and then we dispose of those and blow those up.
So when I was in Grafenwehr, we were doing some cratering charges.
Oh, I love those things.
Cratering charges, you have a shape charge that can shoot down, and it shoots down about 8 feet in the ground. Then you put a cratering charge. This is a 40-pound charge, and you light them up, and that's to crater a road or whatever you want to crater. So we got cratering charges in at Grafenwehr when I was there, dated 1945.
Wow.
And you'll appreciate this. The crystals.
Oh, were they crystallized?
They were crystallized.
Oh, Jesus.
So crystallized is nitro.
Oh, Jesus.
And once you have crystals, they start. If you're not careful, they start rubbing, and then it'll go off.
Really?
Or you can break them.
Right.
Like if there's a crystallization on the outside of the ordnance and you crack it, you can run the risk of starting a chain reaction that goes high order on you.
So, and I got the ASP, the ammo supply point to come on out. Oh, it's just good. I'm like, you sure about? Oh yeah, it's just good. Just put it in. It'll be good. Okay, and then we did move them down, put them in, and they went off. So, and I'm still here. So,
wow.
Yeah, we had some cratering charges in Egypt because we had an airfield, and one of the things we had to do if we were to have to DD Mao was to crater the airfield.
Right.
So I'm like, well, we better train with these, right? This is an engineer tool, not an EOD tool. We better take these out and pop them, and we did. That was great. Made big holes in the ground.
I mean, 200 pounds in the ground, and then just shoot them off.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
So that year in Egypt, I would do re-enlistments where I would set up what I called a wall of flame. I'd take 1.5 liter water bottles, fill them with MoGas, fill them with gasoline, put them about 6 feet apart, and a half a dozen of them, dozen, whatever, and string them together with detonation cord, and then I'd back off a ways, plant a U.S. flag, and I'd swear you in on your re-enlistment. And right as you said the last words, which were "so help me God," one of my guys off camera would pop them, and then you just get this sheet of flame, and they get a picture suitable for framing, and
wow,
and because you didn't have an EPA to worry about over there.
Yeah.
So anyhow, finished that, came back, was fortunate enough to get a second company command at Fort Bragg. So I went to Bragg. While I was at Bragg, I was awarded the Soldier's Medal for having pulled somebody out of a minefield in Egypt, and got the worst ass chewing in my life. My battalion commander just ripped me a new one the day it happened. And he found out that I'd walked 300 meters across a minefield to rescue somebody who just set off a mine in that minefield. And then, a year and a half
What type of mines were
You
they?
get a medal.
They were Czechoslovakian PTMI-BA anti-tank blast mines. How do I know that? With a bakelite casing, but they'd been in the ground for
Forever.
30 years at that point.
Yeah.
So bakelite is a hard plastic. Well, what happens to plastic if you leave it out in the sun?
Melts.
It starts baking.
It starts to bake, and
Yeah.
it weakens, right?
Yeah.
Well, this thing needed 550 pounds of weight to set it off. And it's a big blast mine. So it's a bunch of explosives. And there's a booster charge in the middle. And then the whole thing starts with a large rifle primer and a pointy end of the bakelite. And when you roll over it with a tank, the top breaks, slams down. That pointy end hits it functions as a firing pin, sets off the whole thing. This guy's donkey stepped on it. So anyhow, a year and a half later, I'm getting an award from the 18th Airborne Corps commander for this same thing. So
They had a change of mind on that.
yeah, I never thought I'd see. It's a funny story about that. I get a call one day. I'm the commander at Fort Bragg, EOD. I'm feeling pretty good about myself, pretty salty. Hey, sir, this Captain T.C. Fuller? I said, yeah, sure is. Who's this? Oh, this is Specialist Smith up at Corps headquarters. Hey, what can I do for you, Specialist? Well, sir, I've got this soldier's medal here. It's signed by the Department of the Army. It just came back. We need to set up a time for you to come up here and get an award. And I'm like, Specialist, what building are you in? He says, well, I'm in this building, sir. He says, don't move. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I'll take that off your hands. We'll never need to say another thing about it.
Really?
He goes, it's all on the phone, right? Sir, I don't know if I can do that. I'm like, look, Specialist, I'll give you $20. don't tell a soul. Let me come up and get that thing, and we'll just keep it between us.
We don't need a ceremony.
Right? He's going, hang on a second, sir. And I'm like,
don't say anything.
Chief of staff.
this is Sergeant Major Jones. I'm like, son of a... He's just laughing. Hello, sir. You done scared my specialist. I'm like, come on, Sergeant Major, help me out here. He's like, oh, no, sir. It's not very often we give out a soldier's medal. Because this is the highest peacetime award for heroism the Army gives.
Okay.
So it had to get approved all the way up to Department of the Army.
Okay.
And then had to come all the way back down. So this went through multiple layers, and a bunch of generals had their fingerprints on this thing. And I'm like, Sergeant Major, help me out here. Just give me the award, and we'll call it a day. He's, oh, no, sir. We're going to have us a ceremony.
Oh, gosh.
Son of a... And that's what
Who
we
submitted
had.
you for it?
A friend of mine who was the what was he then? He must have been the S4. No, he's the S1. He was the adjutant in Egypt, and he had a soldier's medal he got on the Green Ramp disaster at Fort Bragg.
Right. At the airport. Or at the, yeah.
An Air Force fighter collided with a C-141 on the deck, and there was a bunch of 82nd Airborne guys getting ready to
ready to jump.
And kablooey, it blows up all over him. My buddy is there. He says he's running away. He watches a nose wheel off the C-141 go sailing past him. And then once the fireball expanded out and died, he turned back around and went back and drug a couple guys out. So he got one. Jeez. He put me in for it. And I said, dude, that's really cool. I really appreciate that, but that's never going to fly. He's like, oh. So to me, it was kind of cool that, my buddies had put me in for it.
Right.
Fine. So a year and a half later, when I hear about this thing, I thought it was dead and gone and, desiccated and shriveled up on somebody's desk somewhere. And this specialist calls me, and I'm like, because I know what's coming. And I'm like, I don't know. We had, news media was there. And 4-star general was handed out, and all these colonels and general. When one 4-star shows up, right, all the 3 stars are there. CGs are, and they just start handing me coins, right? They're all walking through, shaking my hand. I must have come out of there with 30 coins.
Wow.
Crazy. Yeah, it's kind of cool. So anyhow, while I was there, my wife was pretty much like, dude, this is becoming untenable real fast. My daughter was 5. And I'm like, I'm going to end up being one of those lieutenant colonels that doesn't know his daughter. And she's going to be 15. She's going to be sleeping in the barracks, with all these privates. I just don't want anything to do with that. And a good friend of mine had left the Army and had gotten in with the FBI and was at Quantico when I was at Bragg. And he said, hey, you should really, really look into this. Mm-hmm. So I went up and watched him graduate. And I said, all right, I'll roll the dice. Because then I could go to my wife and legitimately say, look, I'm trying. And I figured there's no way I get hired. But at least I can look her in the eye and say, look, I tried, babe.
Yeah.
I gave it a good faith. I kept passing the tests. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll probably fail the next one. Didn't fail the next one. Eventually they gave me the job, and I had to decide, do I want to stay in the Army? Do I want to get out? And I was a finalist in what's called the Olmsted Scholarship of the Army. So there's grad school was in the offing and language training. I mean, it was a pretty good deal. Mm-hmm. But then I kind of looked at the pay rates. And, when I saw what an FBI agent made with 10 years on, and I saw what maybe I could make as a colonel, but there was no real war on the horizon, right? This is pre 9/11.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. So I chose the FBI. I got out of the Army while I was still having a good time. Asked to go back to San Francisco, and they sent me to Vermont.